Okay, so this is a slightly truncated Q&A. I'm going to start with a question that I was sent because it's a question that I know I've answered before, but I thought it was on a Q&A and I couldn't find it, so it probably just came up in Sheer. So the question is, what role should guilt play in our lives? Okay. Um, so you might have heard this answer before, but Rabbi Moskowitz always talked about guilt in the context of fear, shame, and guilt, which is from the conscience. And he seemed to have held that the purpose of guilt is really a prompt for investigation to see if you did anything wrong. Um, Guilt, I think it's a mistake. You could have one or two mistakes. You could either feel guilty about something that you shouldn't feel guilty about, or you could not feel guilty about something that you should feel guilty about. So guilt itself, the conscience itself, is not an indicator of objective reality. It's something that can be a tool for, like, prompting you to use the mind to like examine yourself. And so the example I give is the smoke alarm in old yeshiva. Um, when I was in the dorm, then there were smoke detectors, in all of the rooms, and they were interconnected to the point where if one of them went off, then all of them would go off. And it was someone's bright idea to put a smoke detector right above the stove, and in the kitchen. And so what would often happen is, you'd be like asleep in bed, and you'd wake up to hear all the smoke alarms going off. And someone who didn't know the yeshiva would think, oh, there's a fire. But we knew the yeshiva, so we knew that there's two possibilities. Either there's a fire or someone is making eggs, at 11 p.m., and I think it's a good analogy because the alarm is meant to alarm you, and it does trigger all of these feelings of there's something bad going on or there's some threat, but what you should do, just like the smoke alarms in yeshiva, is you should get out of bed and investigate and feel, discern whether there's actually like a fire or whether there's nothing to be worried about at all and it's a false alarm. So I think that's how guilt that's what guilt should do. And I think just in terms of the other aspect of this is, I think people confuse guilt with the type of busha involved in teshuva. So I just wanted to quickly review that, even though we're not in teshuva season, but it's always teshuva season. Um, Hilchos Tshuva, chapter 2. So the Rambam's definition of tshuva is umahi ha-teshuva. This is Hilchos Tshuva 2:2. What is teshuva? Hushiyazov hachote cheto v'yasridim v'machshavta v'yigmar v'libo shelo yisayu od. The sinner should abandon his sin. He should remove it from his plans, and he should resolve in his heart not to do it again. Shneimar, as it says, Yazov rasha darkov ishav v'makshavosav. The evil one should abandon his way, and the man of iniquity his plans. V'chein yisnachem al she'avar. And also he should regret having transgressed. Shneimar, as it says, Ki achrei shuvi nichamti v'achrei hibadi safachti al yarech. After, as it says, after I returned into Shuva, I regretted, and after I made known my sin, then I slapped my thigh in anguish. And then he should call upon the knower of hidden things as his witness that he will not return to the sin forever. Shneimar, as it says, we will no longer say our gods to the work of our hands, for in you the orphan finds mercy. And he needs to confess and say these things verbally, and say these things that he resolved in his heart. And that confession does mention busha in Hilchos Tshuva 1:1. How do you confess? Omer ana Hashem chatasi v'isi pshati l'fenecha. I beseech you, Hashem, I have sinned unintentionally, intentionally, and rebelliously before you. And I've done such and such. And I regret and am ashamed of my actions. And I will not return to this. So even though the Ram doesn't say it exactly, it does seem like the busha and the nechama are together. That the shame and the regret go together. And the place for that in the tshuva process is not at the beginning. The place for that in the tshuva process is after you've abandoned the sin, removed it from your plans, and resolved not to do it again. Because only at that point do you have the knowledge-based objective perspective of what you did to truly feel the regret and the shame? Otherwise, when you first do the sin, there are feelings of shame and guilt, but those are really not based on knowledge. Those are just a reaction psychologically to like doing what you were told that you're not supposed to do, and that could come from your parents, it could come from society, but it's not coming from your actual tshuva process. So in other words, there's a difference between the guilt and the shame and the fear that like just is elicited in a purely like psychological animalistic way at the outset, which should serve as an impetus for investigation. And then there's the feelings of fear, shame, and guilt that come as a result of knowledge and objective investigation. That second type of fear, shame, and guilt has a basis in reality, but even that, is only like, there's no point in like stewing in that. That should really be there as part of your tshuva process and perfecting of yourself, not just to like feel the guilt for its own sake. So that's like my shita on guilt. Any questions on that? Okay.
What would you say is the process of, I guess it seems like guilt sometimes naturally doesn't work like that because you kind of
Right.
stew in it, as you said.
Right.
So what's the process of moving away from stewing it and moving
Yeah.
towards a more
That's
realistic
good.
guilt?
That's a good question. That is a good question. I mean, just to make a very basic distinction here, that also, Rami Moskowitz emphasized a lot. There's a difference between like, I don't know exactly know what to call it, but there's types of emotional problems and issues that you could work on through, for lack of a better term, like Mishleic thinking, you know, and then there's stuff that requires like what Rav Moskowitz would say, like, you need to go to a professional. Okay. And I know those are two very vague qualities, but like, let's say like a more familiar example is there's a difference between like, you know, feeling sad or down and then clinical depression, and like feeling sad and down either will take care of itself in time or like you could work on it through your own just processes of like thinking about it and or like other strategies available to you like journaling or meditation or whatever, and then there's like a type of depression and sadness that like you need professional help, whether that's in the form of like actual therapy or medication or something like that. So same thing I think with guilt is that some guilt, is like more surface level and either will go away in time or can be dealt with just by thinking about it or by like talking about it with someone or these strategies that are like readily available to us. And then there are types of guilt that stem from childhood trauma or like things that are deeply rooted in the psyche based on how you were raised, and that might require more professional help. So I know that's not directly answering the question because it sounds like you're asking more for like particular strategies, but I have to think about that more. Yeah. Okay. Let's go on to the next question. I'm going to mute this while I blow my nose, but someone can ask the next question.
Yeah, I had a question that was like in a similar vein to what we were just talking about.
Sure.
What would you say, I'm putting an arbitrary number on this question, are three practical ways you can increase your attachment to mitzvos? So
Okay.
obviously, we know rationally mitzvos are good things to do, but people aren't always so, I guess, emotionally attached to them.
Yeah.
Um, either the attachment is either like you don't value it enough, and so you don't end up doing it, or like you do it, but you don't feel the good thing to it, or like you don't, it doesn't like, you know, you're not driven to do it or something like that.
Right.
So like, I guess like what are some practical ways to like increase that attachment
Okay. That's a
if
good
it's even a
question.
good thing?
Yeah. Um, just give me 1 second. I want to see if I can find something. Um, hold on. I'm glad you said three, and you'll see why in a second. Second. Okay. One more second. I'm just getting things up on the screen. Okay. So there's this great book called Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. The subtitle is How to Change Things When Change is Hard. And I know I've talked about this as well, but I think this is a good thing to review every once in a while. And they use the muscle of the rider on the elephant on the path. And they say there's three categories of strategies for changing behavior. there's rider-based strategies, elephant-based strategies, and path-based strategies. And in the muscle, if you think about it, if you got a rider on an elephant, so the rider can exert some influence on the elephant, but it's debatable whether it's always going to work, and it doesn't always work in the way you want it to work. A higher level of success will come if the elephant himself, is motivated by his own, incentives or disincentives. If it sees in the picture a carrot, because we know that elephants love carrots, or if there's like a predator that it's escaping from. And then the most effective strategy is if the elephant is on a path, it'll just follow the path. Okay, so in the muscle or in the nimshal, I guess the rider is a muscle for the rational mind, the elephant is a muscle for the emotional mind or the psyche, and then the path is the environment. The what do you call it? The circumstances of the environment. So they outline in the book rider-based strategies, elephant-based strategies, and path-based strategies, and I think we could apply that to mitzvos. So I was looking up there. They have a cheat sheet. Obviously, this is better if you read the entire book. But let's just review for those. Maybe this would be an incentive for someone to read the book. So 3 of the rider-based strategies. So I guess I'm going to give you 9 strategies.
Multiples. That's great.
Yeah. Rider-based strategies, they have follow the bright spots, script the critical moves, and point to the destination. So I haven't read this book in a couple of years, but follow the bright spots. They say investigate what's working and clone it. So let's say you have mitzvos that you are into, okay, or you have particular instances of a mitzvah that work for you. So let's take davening is one that people struggle with, right? So let's say you had a really good tefillah one time, so ask yourself, what was it about that that instance of tefillah that made me able to connect to it, and let's say you find out that it was because you were incorporating a lot of your personal situation into it through like a bakasha, or there was a need in your life that you had. So you can actually take that and find ways to incorporate that into your daily tefillah of inserting your own bakashas, or taking time to think about how the words connect to your life or whatever. So this is all rider-based strategies. It's in the mind. Point to the destination is another good one. Change is easier when you know where you're going and why it's worth it. So the muscle I like to use here is for those who have seen any version of Karate Kid, but I'll use the original one. The kid Daniel, the Karate Kid, wants to learn how to do karate. So he goes to Mr. Miyagi, who's who says, "I'll teach you karate." And basically, Mr. Miyagi makes him do all of these chores of waxing the car and painting the fence and waxing the car, painting the fence, sanding the floor. And basically, he makes Daniel do these things in this very regimented, rigorous way for weeks or whatever. And then Daniel says one day gets fed up and says I'm tired, you're just getting me to do your chores. And what happens is Mr. Miyagi says, show me, wax the car. So Daniel does the motion of waxing the car, and Mr. Miyagi says, no, do it correctly. So he does it firmly, and Mr. Miyagi throws a punch at him, and Daniel blocks the punch. And then he says, show me, paint the fence. And Daniel goes like this, and Mr. Miyagi kicks, and Daniel realizes he blocked the kick. And so basically Mr. Miyagi shows him that this entire time he was training his body in these rote actions that Daniel did not know had anything to do with martial arts, but he was really training his body in karate, and he just didn't see what the end was, what the point of these actions were. So once Mr. Miyagi showed him that, there was a light bulb aha moment, and he realized, oh, I have been training in karate. So for me, I think with mitzvos, understanding why I'm doing this, and investigating the tamei mitzvos really is very helpful in changing my my attachment and my motivation for doing it. So that's point to the destination, and then script the critical moves. Don't think big picture, think in terms of specific behaviors. Yeah, that's one. I guess that is if you're not already doing the mitzvah, then sometimes it is a matter of confusion about what exactly you're supposed to do, what would be a good example of this? Because a lot of the mitzvahs we do are clearly scripted out. But let's say, for example, I'll give you an example. This is kind of a weird one, but the Seder, um, for a lot of people, then the Seder is like this confusing hodgepodge of like many, details, and there's no like semblance of like forget why you're doing it, but like what you're doing. And for me, we have these shirim that Rabbi Chait gave called the Inyane de Seder series. That he basically goes through every stage of the Seder and says what it is and what you're doing. Or let's say something that's accessible to everybody is the Rambam in Hilchos Chamin Tumata chapters 7 and 8, where the Rambam goes through exactly what you're doing in each stage. Sometimes just knowing what you're doing highlights that and allows you to like do it with more intention. And I think that's a good strategy. Okay, motivate the elephant. All right, this is a longer answer than I thought, but I think this is very useful for us. So the three strategies they say are find the feeling, shrink the change, and grow your people. So find the feeling. Knowing something isn't enough to cause change. Make people feel something. So they give this example of piling gloves on the table. This is my favorite example in the entire book. That there was this employee working at a pharmaceutical supply company, and it was a low-level employee. And this employee noticed that like this pharmaceutical supply company was buying different supplies from different suppliers for radically different prices. And this was causing like, I forgot what the number was, but like, millions of dollars in loss, of like loss, of like senseless loss, So he wanted to try to like find a way to convince the higher ups that they were like losing money needlessly. So someone who is thinking only on a rider-based level would make a PowerPoint or like make charts and show them numbers. But the point that Chip and Dan Heath make is that that's not going to motivate anybody. So what this guy did was he took he said, okay, let's take an example, latex gloves. Okay. And he took these gloves and he attached price tags to the gloves based on what was paid for this glove from this company and this glove from this company. And he dumped this pile of gloves onto the conference room table prior to a meeting. And what happened is like all these, like the CEO and like all these higher ups in the company came in and they like picked up these gloves and saw like, oh, this one says $15 and this one says $5. Like, why are these all different prices? And he like awakened these feelings in them that like motivated them to change, So finding the feeling is something that is important. And I think that in an environment like certainly in our yeshiva, where feelings are not really talked about as much as they should, then people like neglect this. And things that don't necessarily have to do with the strict halacha or the strict purpose, can be infused with meaning and motivation through feeling. Like, like I know a lot of families around here don't sing Zmiros, but Zmiros can change the feelings around the Shabbos table, or like, certain times people will only do like what is halakhically required plus like what's philosophically advantageous, but that might not be enough to get you into the mood of the mitzvah. So you might need to like find ways to like spice up your mitzvah practice by finding, it could be pre-existing minhagim, it could be like your own flourishes for things that like make it, exciting. Like for me, I mean, I have a very easy time getting into the Seder, but like I also have my like Seder preparation playlist, where I like listen to specific songs, not Jewish songs, Chas v'shalom, but like, songs that like get me in emotionally in the mood, So that's an example. Shrink the change. I mean, this is probably the one that is the most prominent in my own life because atomic habits and tiny habits are based on this one move. Break down the change until it no longer spooks the elephant. So you find the smallest version of the action and you start doing that, and then you grow it from there. So the example that in atomic habits he uses is like, you want to go jogging. So, for an entire week, just put on your jogging shoes, and once you get into that habit, then like increase it. So for me, my most recent example of this that was really successful was was going on my elliptical, and like I have had this elliptical for years and not done it. But what I started doing is I incorporated it into my routine, and I did it 1 minute a week, right when I woke up, and then I increased it after that to 2 minutes, and then 3 minutes, and then 4 minutes, and then built it up into a practice. So you find the smallest amount of it. Last thing is grow your people, cultivate a sense of identity, and instill growth mindset. This is a big one. He's not here right now, but talk to Sean Slamowitz about this because he talks about this a lot, and he has good techniques as well. Is you make it a part of your identity, and I think that's why I think for people who struggle with davening or with minyan, in smaller communities where you make the minyan, then it could be much easier to get involved, because now it's not just like I'm a nameless person who like gloms onto like a an institution. I am essential for the minion. I am someone who makes the minion. So when you change it from a behavior to I am this kind of person, then it's different. Or let's say like I've talked with people who have a difficult time reading, and if they're starting off with this thing like I'm not a reader, so then like that's a problem. But if you find ways to make yourself into a reader, like let's say for example, you listen to audiobooks, and in your mind, listening to audiobooks is not the same thing as reading. But if you can find a way to rewire that into part of your identity and realize, oh, I am a reader because I finish a book every 2 weeks. Like you can make that into something that that is identity driven. This is also the first chapter, I think, of Atomic Habits. Okay, last one, shape the path. The three strategies are tweak the environment, build habits, and rally the herd. Tweak the environment when the situation changes, the behavior changes. So change the situation. So examples of this are, I think, from Atomic Habits is, if you find yourself like, always eating junk food instead of healthy food, so make the junk food inaccessible or don't have it in your house, and like put fruit on the table, and you'll encounter it. So very, very easy to just change the situation where you will encounter it all the time. Or like, if you always forget to do stuff like, like I have a thing where like if I know I'm going to be davening not with a minion, and I know it's Rosh Chodesh or coming up or something like that, I will my current method is I will put an object that's not supposed to be there on top of my talis and tefillin. So like I'll put my hat on top of my talis and tefillin, so I'll encounter it and remember that. Or let's say like remembering Ya'alev Yavo, I have book darts in my siddur that I will like just put the book darts. I have 3 gold book darts for every Ya'alev Yavo, and I'll put the gold book darts on the page that has my that has Ya'alev Yavo on it, and I just won't forget it. So just change the environment. Don't rely on this other stuff. Build habits. When behavior is habitual, it's free. It doesn't tax the rider. Look for ways to encourage habits. Setting action triggers, eating 2 bowls of soup while dieting, using checklists. Okay, fine. So there's a lot of examples there as well, and a lot of strategies. Read Atomic Habits and Tiny Habits. Habit stacking is my favorite one, where you take something you're already doing and you attach a new habit to that. Or temptation bundling, where you take something that you want to do and then you put an action that you need to do as like your ticket to doing the action that you want to do. So again, for me, good example of this was exercising. What's something I don't like exercising, so I want to make that part of my routine. Well, what's something I do every morning? I get out of bed. So as soon as I get out of bed, I just get into push-up position and do push-ups and then sit-ups, and then I incorporate my workout routine into that. What's something else that I want to do every morning? Well, I want to put on my glasses, so I make it a point where I don't allow myself to put on my glasses until after I've done my exercises. So lots of stuff in Atomic Habits and Tiny Habits. And then rally the herd. Behavior is contagious, help it spread. I don't remember Fataki in Tanzania, free spaces in hospitals, seating in the tip jar. I don't actually remember this part of the book. Probably because it's at the end, so I can't give you a chazara on that. But I would say that, the more people who are involved in this thing, then the easier it is going to be for you to do. And that's why I was talking with someone recently about who was, struggling in certain aspects of their halacha observance. And it happens to be that they're living in an environment that they're not in a religious community, and like they're not, there are religious people, but they're not like hanging around these religious people on the day to day. And I said like that's going to be an uphill battle, so like having people who are around you who are doing the same things is going to shape your willingness to do it, because we're herd creatures. That's the Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva Hilchos Deos chapter 6, which I'll read for the 600th time. Derek Rias Adam Leos Nimshach B'Deosav V'Masav Acharev Chaverav. It's the nature of man to be drawn in his ideas. I don't know if Deos here. Sorry, his character traits and his actions after his friends and associates. V'Nohag B'Minhag Anshe Medinaso, and to behave like the behavior of the the people in his society. Lefikach, therefore, tzarech adam lihischaber letzadikim v'leishiv etel hachamim tamid kadei sheyilon maasehem. Therefore, a person needs to befriend tzadikim and sit near chachamim constantly in order to learn from their actions. And he needs to distance himself from the evildoers who walk in darkness so that he doesn't learn from their actions. Omer, this is what Shlomo says: one who walks with the wise will become wise, but one who associates with fools will be broken. And that's just walking with the wise, even not like learning with them, just walking with them, hanging out with them will make you wiser. And associating with fools, not even befriending them, just associating with them, you'll pick up on their bad habits and you'll be broken. But Omer, and it says, Ashrei ha'ish asher halach ba'atas rishayim. Happy / praiseworthy is the man who does not follow the counsel of the wicked. Uvederach ha'taim lo amad, uv'moshav leitzim lo yashav. And he doesn't stand on the path of sinners, and he doesn't sit in the session of scoffers. But only in the Torah of Hashem is his desire, and in his Torah he thinks day and night. So that's being influenced by the people around you. And Rishaim there doesn't even mean like evildoers, according to many. It means like people who are like pursuing profit, pursuing money. As an example. So yeah, so your environment can really shape you. I don't know if that's what they meant by rally the herd. And then to that, I'll add a 10th strategy, which is this is just the Sefer Chinuch in general, is I think, especially if you're coming from a cognitive, cerebral, rational perspective, then there's this belief that like, I have to understand something in order to do it. But we just read in Mishpatim, Nasem V'nishma, that like, the way that, Judaism's attitude is, which is reiterated by the Sefer Chinuch again and again, is changes in your mind and in your emotions follow after changes in your behavior. You do the actions, and then that shapes your emotions and your mind. So in terms of this paradigm of the rider, the elephant, and the path, shaping the path will change your feelings, which in turn will change your mind. That's just the way it works. And if you think about it the other way around, that's just viewing yourself as like this like super rational being, and like it's discounting like your emotional and environmental factors. So there's 10 answers to your question, Isaiah, which obviously, it helps to like workshop these in terms of specifics, but I think this is a good review. And again, clearly, I highly recommend this book. I had forgotten how good this book is, but look, what did they do? They applied this this strategy of script of critical moves. They made a one-page cheat sheet with all these moves, and it like jogged my memory and like jogged my emotions. So that ended up helping. Yeah, Isaac.
I have a different question.
Sure.
Okay. So, how can you tell if let's say if your behavior over a certain, let's say time period of let's say a couple of weeks, is indicative of whether it's indicative of a larger trend or if it's because of the situation?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah. How can you tell if your behavior over a couple of weeks is indicative of a larger trend or?
Yeah. Would help to give an example?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So let's say a person has a few week break in between jobs.
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically.
Yeah.
And they're having trouble doing more learning than they had previously been doing.
Yeah.
But they're also, the reason why they're taking the 2-week break is to be able to relax and decompress and recover after the last job, which had a bunch of problems.
Right. Hypothetical problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, how can such a theoretical person tell if it's indicative of, let's say, a larger problem with the way that they're relating to learning, or if it's, just, because of the situation?
Right. That's a really good question. I mean, the immediate answer that suggests itself is which I know is not always practical, but remove the confounding variable, which means change the situation, or once the situation changes, if the problem persists, then it's a problem, or then it's become internalized, but that's not always the case. Like in the situation you're describing, like you know, yeah, it's a good question. You know, the other thing I'm struggling with in terms of answering this question is maybe just because I just talked so much about the path in this paradigm here. Like, is there such a thing as mitos? What I mean by that is like, you know, and obviously there is such a thing, but like so much of our, you know, zechuyos and avonos, you know, our perfections and imperfections and virtues and vices are tied to the situation we're in, that it's almost a hainu hach answer, like you are the situation, you know, in many ways. And that might be a healthier way to look at it, you know, like let's say like you're feeling bad about the fact that let's say you're feeling conflicted about the fact that you're in between jobs and like your learning has not been as great, and you're like wondering how much of this is due to like, you know, the circumstance, how much is this due to like, you know, like internalized changes. Like, you know, maybe the answer is it doesn't matter, and like you can shape your mitos by changing the situation by implementing any of these techniques that you've you know, that you've had. Like, I don't know if that's an acceptable answer. You know, like let me put it this way. I think that there are again, I'll blame it on like our unique, you know, not unique, our culture here is like, I think sometimes there is an overemphasis on like objective diagnosis of like, well, what am I really, or like what is the real root of the problem. And I think it can become possible to get so much into that question as that it could become a barrier to change. And like the answer could easily be, well, it doesn't matter what the cause is. If I can use these techniques to like change the situation, then like I don't need to sit there wondering what the cause is, you know. And I think there is, you know, going back to like Isaiah's question in the beginning, um that, or my answer to Isaiah's question of like, if it does persist, then you have a real problem, you know, and then that needs to be dealt with. But I think like in many cases, it's just like people waiting for change to waiting until they get an answer to that question for change to happen when they could just make it happen. And then I realized in your particular question, like, you know, there's a question of like, well, when should I make the change? When have I decompressed enough? You know, I think that needs to be evaluated with a combination of like pragmatism of like how long of a break is too long, and I'm like now in a detrimental mode in terms of my development, and how much of it is there's also needs to be like a self like you need to be in tune with your feelings and get to know yourself. Like for example, for me, whenever I burn out and then I like, you know, ideally go back to home to Seattle and like, you know, have this period of like recovery, there's always this time when I know that out of nowhere I will suddenly feel, okay, I'm ready to go back to my schedule, you know. And there's always this like fear that that's not going to come, and so far it's come every time.
Yeah.
But like I know myself that like if I'm starting to feel the feelings that you're describing, I just need to wait, and then there's going to be a time when like I'm ready to go back, you know. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I can prescribe that for other people, but like you know, it's a matter of self knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess also just thinking about the situation,
Yeah.
I think something that I've been hypothetically comparing myself to
Yeah.
is, you know, the amount of like, you know, time and energy that I was putting in when I was in yeshiva full time, you know.
Right. That is a big thing also, is like recognizing when your life circumstances have changed, you know,
Yeah.
and you can't hold yourself to those same standards. Like let's say hypothetical situation is someone has a new child, you know, and like it changes all their routines, you know, like they can't be beating themselves up for not having the same involvement in learning or in, you know, mitzvah routine as before.
A lot
Yeah.
of hypotheticals.
A lot of hypotheticals, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You know, I mean, this has been a thing also. Like for me, like you know, I had a job change this year, and like a lot of me beating myself up has been from comparing my habits and routines to what it was before that job, and also forgetting that like there's an adjustment period to a new job, that like I wasn't giving myself that, you know, it's not just a matter of time either. Sometimes it's like, you know, the phrase people like to use nowadays is like is giving yourself grace, you know, like there's a grace period of like needing to like, okay, like change takes time to adjust, and like I need to like be forgiving to myself about that.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a prescribable length to that. Yeah. Okay. This was a very, very fruitful Q&A. I'm glad we
Yeah.
did this. And you know, it's funny also, I'll just say this, I'll probably write about this soon as well. But like, you know, there's this I was a little sour from the fact that like I walked all the way to yeshiva and then like had to cancel and change my views. This is just a good reminder of like it's not the amount of time, it's the quality of the learning, you know, and like you know, learning makes everything better. You know, like I'm in a super good mood now, and so it's yeah, this is a good Q&A. I'm glad we had.
I just want to add in one thing.
Yeah.
I've been implementing your half rule a lot these past few months.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you mentioned it or
Sure, if you
it.
want to say it over, then go ahead.
Yeah, where it's if your goal is to, let's say, go on the elliptical for 10 minutes every day and
Yeah.
you really don't want to, then just convince yourself to do 5. Like, okay, you know what, I'll just do half of it.
Yeah.
And then it gets you to do it. And you had told me that it often then like pushes you to do the full 10.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, okay. And it does. Like it's great.
Yeah. All right, good. I'm glad you reminded me of that. Yeah. Yeah, that
Yeah.
also pairs well with 2 of the things mentioned in Atomic Habits of don't break the streak and never miss twice. You know, don't break the streak. It means that if you could shrink it down, you know, my rule is the one I came up with on my own of like just do half, but like even if you're gonna do half, do 1 minute, like just do a token amount just to not break the streak. And then if you do miss, don't miss twice, you know. And that's another way of like just make it into a rule to get yourself back into the loop, you know. Yeah. A lot of these
So
good
for me it was running outside, and I was like, okay, walk outside.
Yeah.
And that would do it.
There's another going. See, this whole discussion is just a reminder of why, again, like you know, classic machlokus between me and Rabbi Moskowitz of like Rabbi Moskowitz's approach of being just go over the ideas and then over time the change will happen on its own. That is someone who is totally rider focused, and I think there's so much you could do that is elephant focused and path focused, and like it's a mistake for us to discount these things, and you should like learn them. And there are a lot of good books like Switch and Atomic Habits and Tiny Habits and more. So, all right, good. All right, this is great. All right, have a good rest of the day. Good luck with your habits and attachment to mitzvahs.
Bye.
Thanks.